I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Bob Marks.
Welcome to the game. The San Mateo County Sheriff's Office is in crisis and in controversy. It may be an unprecedented level of controversy in the history of this county. And in the middle of it are two members of the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors, Supervisor Ray Mueller, and Supervisor Noelia Corzo. And they're here for really the first in-depth interview, I believe, they've given on this subject. They've held a number of news conferences and done hit and runs with members of the press, I'm sure. But thank you both for joining us, especially in the midst of such a busy and controversial time. Let's start with you, Ray, and then Noelia, if you can ask the same question. We've Bob and I and a number of people have read closely the 400-page report by retired Judge Cordell. The details in there are certainly exhaustive and exhausting. Give me an overview sense, Ray, because Sheriff Corpus took office amid a lot of optimism and hope that there was a sort of new, fresh approach to that office. What went wrong? What do you think went wrong there?
Well, you know, as an elected official, you're as good as your staff members. And when I think that breaks down, I think that rings true, even more true when you're looking at a very large organization to manage, such as the Sheriff's Office. I think it's pretty evident that Sheriff Corpus made some very good hires, I think, initially, of people with strong reputations. But it appears that one of her hires did not work out in the way that I think taxpayers in San Mateo County would have hoped. We've seen a mass exodus in resignations and firings from that command staff, and there seems to have been one sole survivor of that, who was really the main focus of many of the allegations that were sustained in the complaint. And so I think, as an elected official myself, I love my team dearly. If I had one member of my team that was causing that much dysfunction in the county organization, that team member wouldn't be with me anymore. And I think that when you go through that report and you're just thinking at a rational, reasonable perspective, it's inescapable that conclusion that there's something incredibly wrong in the relationship that exists between the sheriff and her former chief of staff. That's caused a tremendous amount of dysfunction in that department.
Noelia, I know from personal experience from your campaign, and you've said as much, you were very, very much a supporter of Sheriff Corpus when she was a candidate, campaigned very actively for her, even when you're busy trying to win your own election. Same question. What do you think went wrong?
I think what went wrong is that our sheriff lost her way. I think she made repeatedly the same decision to believe and follow the advice of one individual over the advice of every single other person in her circle, until that circle got smaller and smaller and smaller and led us to where we are now. There's been claims from the sheriff that she had no idea about any of these allegations, and that's just not true. Anyone in any workplace, of course, raises issues up their own chain of command before they ever make an accusation or file a complaint to HR or to a whistleblower hotline, etc. And what we know is that, there has been intimidation and retaliation over the course of many months, if not years. And it's just kind of unexplainable, but I do think it has to do with her lack of experience as an elected official and not really understanding how to navigate that kind of power. I think for those of us who have had more elected experience, where you are part of a board, you understand that you work together, you hold each other accountable, you share that power. And the power that the sheriff has is immense. And what we're seeing when it's abused is tragic. So those are my thoughts.
So we have seen extensive, angry, and defiant responses from the sheriff. The report is full of lies. It relies too much on one unnamed witness. This is an attempt to bully her, and it is the old boys club asserting itself against someone who has been determined to change the status quo. I don't think we've seen either one of you specifically react to her reaction, to her behavior. Noelia, what is your reaction when you see her go on TV and extensively condemn the whole process as dishonest and misleading and an attempt to hold on to the old boys network?
I think a fellow supervisor of ours said it best, and he essentially likened her behavior to that of our incoming president. And when you take a step back from the situation and you really think about what some of those tactics are, they are to deny, distract, deflect, defend. And I think that's what we're seeing in our sheriff. Just no, not a single shred of wanting to be accountable, of wanting to take responsibility for the conditions of her office and her team. It is just sometimes I'm at a loss for words because I really just can't explain it, but it's for I'll speak for myself. I had, we've been grappling with this for a while, right? And a lot of our community, this is brand new to them. And so when they hear our sheriff speaking to the media, they believe her lies. Some people believe her lies. The report has evidence that speaks for itself. The sheriff actually has made comments about me specifically that are just not true. And she can talk as loud and as aggressively as she wants. The truth is going to speak for itself, and it is. It already is.
Ray, same question. Do you think she knows she's lying? Do you think she believes what she's saying?
Well, I think she's saying the communication script that she's been given. She sticks up until now, she stuck to a theme of that she pretty much reiterates in every interview. She's not asked tough questions. She only sits down for interviews with specific reporters who ask her my humble opinion, very weak, open-ended questions without follow-up for anything specific related to an allegation within the report. But the sheriff could clear this up very simply if she wanted to come in and sit down under penalty of perjury and answer the specific allegations in the report. She was unwilling to be interviewed during the report. She came before our board, actually, when we were meeting on this matter, and again, made a very large blanket statements, but refused to provide any specific, anything even close to a specific denial. And when I asked her in that meeting, would she agree to sit down and give sworn testimony, she said she would consider it if she were represented, but didn't even commit to it then. And since that time period, she has not responded to any specific allegation that was sustained in that report. But more importantly, the trope that she's offered, this large general blanket defense, just factually isn't correct. She has said she's fighting an old boys network, when in reality, 4 of the 5 captains, well, actually more than that, because of the captains who left, she also hired, but 4 of the 5 who remain were her hires. Her undersheriff was her hire. Her assistant sheriff was her hire. All of these people, the undersheriff resigned, the assistant sheriff was fired in what was sustained by Judge Cordell as retaliation. The 5 captains who remain, who have voted her for her resignation, This is her department. She's not fighting any old boys network. She's fighting the dysfunction she created. And it's startling to me that no one pushes back on it, that every time she says it.
Noelia, as you read through the report, was there one thing that jumped out at you, or was it the totality of the report?
It was most definitely the totality, and what the employees of the sheriff's office who had the courage to come forward with is very compelling. But the line where no, let me restate that. All of it is very serious, but the homophobic text messages and the racial slurs, to me, someone who thinks and acts and speaks and writes in that way should never be in elected office, period. So those things really did stand out to me, especially, in San Mateo County. That is not the kind of a leader that any informed voter would support here in this community. There's a picture of Victor Anye with the incoming president in the report, and that stood out to me as well, because it really, to me, I'm gonna choose my words wisely here, but those are some of the things that stood out to me. And taking away, like, how do I say this? Those things, happened. And if the community had known, we wouldn't ever have been in this situation, right?
Ray, how about you? Was there one thing, or was it the whole report?
Honestly, the whole report, taken collectively, is so incredibly damaging. And the conduct as the report was being compiled, the firing of Assistant Sheriff Monahan in retaliation 2 days after he spoke to the independent investigator, and frankly, the conduct after the report has been issued, or at the time the report was issued, as well. I am very concerned about the arrest of Carlos Tapia, because she referenced it. Both myself and Mr. Callaghy, in the press conference, she announced the arrest. That we needed to get on the right side of the law. She alleged we've been meeting with Mr. Tapia behind closed doors, which is false. We hadn't been. But it showed motive for her, why that arrest was so important to happen that day. That's wrong. If that is what motivated her in any way to arrest Mr. Tapia that way, that is abuse of power and corruption. And I am very concerned about that. And that may in itself end up being the most damaging thing that the sheriff has done, in a culmination of a report which was incredibly damaging to begin with, which altogether would have called for her firing. But if she did that, there is a line that she crossed that I think, if they find that to be the case, boy, I would not want to be sitting in her and her conspirators' shoes.
Do you think there are any clear violations of the law? Go ahead, Noelia.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one thing. One thing that actually also stood out to me was the suppressed rifles. The suppressed rifles, to me, think about this. There are staff all throughout the sheriff's office that are in fear of being retaliated against, being intimidated, etc. And Victor Anye chooses to order that suppressed rifles be delivered to the sheriff's office. And we now know that he had the code to that safe, even when Under Sheriff Perea did not. And the timing of those orders, making that order, knowing that no one in the executive leadership of the sheriff's office had the training or qualifications to possess those weapons. What was the purpose of that other than continued intimidation and fear in that office.
Let me ask both of you, are you concerned about your own personal safety? Ray?
What I'll say to you is that others whose opinions who I trust and rely upon are. And that gives me pause. I don't typically think about something like that, but certainly others whose opinions who I would respect tell me that I should be concerned about that.
Noelia?
I think it's pretty common sense to know that when you're taking on corruption of this kind, when you're dealing with people that have weapons, that have badges, there's concerns there.
Noelia, another concern I think you alluded to in your news conference on Thursday, I'm losing track of what day all these things are happening. Are you getting particular pressure from the Latino community who essentially say you're selling out your community?
I'm actually not hearing that. We did have a speaker come at our meeting earlier this week and say something that I never thought I would hear in my lifetime. I'm sorry. It's not funny. But sometimes you have to laugh instead of cry.
Someone accused you of being a white supremacist? Never thought you'd
Of
hear
being
that?
of being a tool to white supremacy. I think for those who know me and know my work and know my track record on equity, on inclusion, on belonging, on all of that kind of work, I'd probably be one of the last people that would have someone would cause someone to say those words to me, or in front of our board. 100%, I feel really confident that a vast majority of the Latino community don't even know what's going on. That is, feel pretty confident about that. I do know that we have had some folks come and speak in Spanish in support of the sheriff. I spoke in Spanish at our last press conference, and I asked folks to read the report, to understand what's happening. Many people in the Latino community left because of the fear of corruption and the impacts of their lives in their home countries. And so we can't stand for that here. And we can't let someone use the Latino community to shield themselves. And so, there also, I believe, was a press conference or a video that the sheriff had in North Fair Oaks with some folks that are, well respected in that community. And there are people in our community that can't say no to the sheriff because they have contracts where their entire staff is paid for by the sheriff. And I think it's wrong to use people in that way for your political purposes.
Ray, you referenced at one point when you were talking about the arrest of Carlos Tapia, the head of the Deputy Sheriff's Association. Indeed, minutes before you held your first press conference to release the Cordell report, you talked about essentially that issue being adjudicated, for lack of a better word. The charter amendment that you will, I assume, act to put on the ballot at next week's board meeting really puts the board in the position of adjudicating many of these issues, doesn't it? And let's talk a little bit about the charter amendment. Are you concerned it won't pass? There are some people who are uneasy about ceding more authority to the Board of Supervisors, especially over another elected official. Why a charter amendment? Why not a recall? So tell us why you chose to take that path. And if we can, Noelia, I assume, I know you're supporting that. We can also talk a little bit about what your concerns are about whether it won't pass, right?
Well, certainly I'm concerned whether or not it'll pass, because if it doesn't pass, then we have to figure out another way to uh, go about restoring a functional sheriff's office to protect the public and to protect the public safety of the county. The charter amendment, candidly, is it's much faster, it's less expensive, and can be done in a fashion which could be characterized as similar to a recall, but it's less expensive than a recall and faster than a recall. And the reason why you can,
I'm sorry, Ray, but there's one major difference, which is that the voters aren't, as much as a local columnist may have said that this sort of joins the issue as directly addressing the question of the sheriff's conduct. Ultimately, if it passes and you proceed, you'll be sitting in judgment over the sheriff and her conduct.
Respectfully, as I was about to say, to pass the charter amendment, we're going to need to make the case to the voters to pass the charter amendment based on the sheriff's conduct. And so I don't think voters in this county are going to give us or are going to pass the charter amendment unless they're convinced that it's necessary for the board to remove the sheriff. Simply put, the charter amendment with a sunset provision of the ability to remove the sheriff really puts in square view to the voters why we brought the charter amendment forward. This is us going to the voters asking for a grant of power specifically to remove the sheriff. Full stop. And after that, we've taken time to address that. That grant of power is going to go away. And that really is us going to the voters and saying, this is an unprecedented crisis. You have all of the captains, you have all of the representation of all of the sworn law enforcement personnel in the county saying the sheriff is not fit to lead them, is not fit to run the sheriff's office, which provides for their public safety. It's unprecedented. The Cordell report is unprecedented. And in that crisis, the board is saying we have no other way to expediently address this issue to provide for your public safety than to ask you to please give us the ability with a temporary grant of power to act in your best interest, to act on your behalf. And we will have presented the case to you as transparently as possible. And we continue to provide the information to you as transparently as possible so you can use your voice in a manner to make the right decision. And it may be very well that the voters will look at it and say we're still not comfortable with the grant of power, and we'll have to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to get a recall on. But the one thing I know Supervisor Corzo and my colleagues are in agreement with is that we are in agreement with all of those sworn law enforcement personnel and those captains that the sheriff must go.
The California Sheriff's Association sent the board a letter where they raised concern about the charter amendment, said they thought the recall was the better approach to take. Are you worried that you could face a very well-funded campaign that might include dollars from around the state, from sheriffs or their supporters around the state?
I would share with you that letter was sent before the sunset provision in the charter amendment was actually released. And there are discussions taking place in Sacramento now that I am aware of with the sheriff's organization. And there are other law enforcement organizations and law enforcement organizations here in the Bay Area that are with us. And I expect at the end of the day, we will not see a campaign from a statewide organization against this charter amendment because it's not in the best interests of that sheriff's organization to have this sheriff in power.
I'll add that I feel very, very confident that if and when this goes before the voters, it will pass. It passed overwhelmingly in Los Angeles County when they put their charter amendment on the ballot in 2022. I think it was about 70%. And I say if only because our sheriff still has the opportunity to make one good decision in after the many bad ones that she has made, and that is to resign before we have to spend dollars that our community needs now more than ever on a special election. It will be in the millions. I think the last number I'm waiting for a completely solidified number, but I believe it'll be about $3.8 million. And our sheriff has the choice to resign, and that's what she needs to do. Our voters, our community, our residents should not continue to be negatively impacted by the decisions made in our sheriff's office.
Is it too late to go anywhere else? Is there any way that Sheriff Corpus, any conditions you would accept that would allow her to remain in office? What if she removed the controversial Victor Anye from the office entirely rather than promoting him to a new job? What if she rehired the command staff that has departed and said, I've read the report, I've learned my lesson, I'm ready to do a better job?
Mark, I will only speak for myself when I say that there's been too much damage done. There is no way that this sheriff can remain in office and lead this organization out of this destruction that she and her leadership team created. There's absolutely no way, in my personal opinion. The sheriff released a voice message that I left her a week ago, and I told her then, and I'll stand by it, I was willing to speak to her that day, and I'm not willing to ever take another call from her. She's had many opportunities to do the right thing. We are past that, and our community will rebuild and will rebuild and heal and come back stronger than before. But she cannot be a part of that.
Right.
Let me ask both of you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah. So the first thing I'd say is I'd really encourage people to read the claim that we released yesterday from Captain Brian Phillips, talking about the arrest of Carlos Tapia and his resignation in the face of being asked to do so.
Let me interject. Claim meaning he's filed a legal claim for damages for the sort of personal turmoil he's had to go through when he was ordered to fire Tapia and he declined to do so.
Right.
It's a precursor to a lawsuit.
Right. Precursor for a lawsuit. But separate from that, what I'd say is I strongly believe in redemption stories. I believe in people being able to redeem themselves. But that process usually begins with someone accepting fault and someone accepting the consequences of that fault, and then someone being ready to move on and repair and heal. I believe and I hope, I shouldn't say I believe, but I hope someday Sheriff Corpus has a redemption story. But I do not believe it is appropriate for that redemption story to take place in the Sheriff's Office of San Mateo County.
Is there a role here that the Attorney General can play?
We certainly are in the process of referring the matter to the Attorney General. There is a role that the Attorney General can play, and we will wait to see if the Attorney General is going to become involved in a more concrete fashion. The Attorney General has supervisory authority over the sheriff's departments, and also could come in on criminal charges and criminal investigation if he chose to do so. The matter is in the process of being referred to the Attorney General's office. It has been referred to the District Attorney's office, and it's we are in the process of referring the matter to the civil grand jury.
Can we expect a full campaign to pass this ballot measure, this charter amendment? Mail pieces, money raised, that kind of thing? Noelia?
You know, Mark, I'll say it again. I believe that before we start thinking about those steps, that we still do everything in our power to encourage the sheriff to resign. She needs to resign. The taxpayers and our community should not have to spend the time and the energy to run a campaign, but we will if we need to. We will do it well. We're seeing folks who aren't typically on the same side of issues come together for this, and that says a lot about the unity around this issue and the recognition that the sheriff's decisions in the sheriff's office impacts our entire community and greatly decreases public safety and the confidence that the public has in public safety and our law enforcement officials.
Do you really think there's a chance she might resign?
You know, you'd think that any rational person would get to a place where they recognize that they're not being victimized here. They are not being threatened. They are not being picked on by the entire world. They are seeing the consequences of their own actions. I still have some hope, but it maybe is beyond reason that I have that hope, but I still have a shred of hope.
Ray, what is assume there is a campaign to pass the ballot measure. Give us your succinct, elevator pitch on what's the message you're trying to deliver to voters.
I think the message we're delivering to voters is that the sheriff needs to be removed as a result of the dysfunction to public safety that has been exposed, and that this is the only way we can do so in a manner to end this crisis. I think, and then I think the fact that all sworn law enforcement personnel under her watch are calling for that resignation, the 400-page report. But at the very basis of this, this really is a story about we are in an unprecedented crisis for public safety in our county. And I really think that sometimes gets lost in this discussion, Mark. I have real concerns right now, having been through a shooting in Half Moon Bay, having been through extreme weather events, we're an earthquake away from understanding what the level of dysfunction that we have in our sheriff's office could mean in terms of suffering. This is not to be taken lightly. And I think that's why you saw all those captains come forward in a moment of bravery to take that vote. That was a courageous thing yesterday, this week, and to see those captains yesterday appear at the press conference. Those are not union protected individuals. There are 5 captains who are speaking out against the sheriff who put them in those positions. And it is an incredible act of bravery on their part to do so, and to risk the livelihoods of their families, to tell not just the sheriff, but every resident in San Mateo County, help, we got a big problem here.
Noelia?
I think it boils down to something actually very simple, which is, and this is what I think would be posed to the voters. Does our sheriff have the right to be above the law? Does the law enforcement, the highest ranking law enforcement official in our county, have the right to be above the law? Or do we need someone in that position who we can entrust to uphold the law, who respects the law and follows it, who protects the people within their own office? Do we have a sheriff we can trust? It's very simple, right? Her campaign was about, a sheriff you can trust. It takes time to build trust, and what we see now is a mountain of evidence about why our sheriff is not trustworthy. I think the voters will understand when they see all of the information, when they, if you ask someone whether they support corruption, the answer is no. I think the voters will do the right thing. They did it in LA County, and I think they would do it here.
Let me ask you, in a campaign like this, it's countywide, could be very expensive. Where does the money come? Who's going to contribute to this campaign to wage a countywide campaign? It's certainly conceivable that Victor Anye talks in the report about how much money he has, that they could have a very well-funded side of this thing. Where is the money going to come from?
I think that's a good question, but I also think, where does the money for any campaign come from, right? Where did the money for my campaign come from?
Right.
It came from people in this community who believe in the campaign, in the candidate, in the position that's being put before the voters. Our community is very wealthy in a variety of ways. We will find the money. Folks who believed in the sheriff and supported her, believed in the vision that she presented, and they still believe in that vision, despite having to come face to face with the heartbreak of now understanding that the sheriff they thought they could trust is not the person she said she was. I think we will get it done. We know how to make the case. We will share the facts, and we are in a very diverse and wise, and just our community has so much intelligence and wisdom, and we'll do the right thing. We'll come out stronger.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, it does take money to run a campaign, but it takes people to run a campaign. It takes supporters. And both Supervisor Corzo and I know how to run campaigns. And the people of this county, when you run a campaign over a large area, you need people who care about you to actually go door to door and talk and speak on your behalf and carry your banner. And campaigns are very personal, and voters are very smart, especially at the local level. I don't care how much money Sheriff Corpus has. I highly doubt that she's going to have the number of heartfelt supporters that she's going to need to overcome the wave of people who are just going to be so disappointed. And I gotta say, I know Supervisor Corzo has seen it, and I certainly have seen it. People who are taking this in, it takes a little while for them to do it. And the hurt for those who supported her, it is a very deep hurt. And it takes a while, but once people get it, man, those folks are going to walk to get her out because they feel almost responsible for her being there. They feel just so incredibly disappointed, and they want change, and they wanted it in her, and she didn't bring it. And I think that we are going to see a mountain of volunteers.
Well, listen, we know it's been a hectic several days for both of you. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us to talk about these things in such depth. And good luck to you as this unfolds. It's funny. You run a campaign for office. You guys were elected the same year that the sheriff was, this never came up. You end up dealing with issues that no one asked you about when you were out running around campaigning. So,
well, you know what's funny about that, Mark, is they actually did. And I know, and I was there with Supervisor Corzo when they did. People asked Supervisor Corzo, would we have the courage to hold the sheriff accountable? And we were asked that many times when we ran. And I'm proud of the fact to stand with her and say to voters who voted for us, yeah, we had that courage.
well, on that note, thank you very much for being with us. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Bob Marks.
And thank you for being with us here on The Game.
Thank you.